Second, we're going to discuss my own linguistic identity. Third, what's at stake at the tutor table. And fourth, I'd like to encourage all of you to take part in a discussion among your audience members, or even take this discussion home back to your own writing centers and discuss it among your peers and colleagues as well. So first off, what is new racism? New racism denies the existence of both structuralized, systematic, and institutionalized racism. So what that means is that these big institutions in our society, like our banks and our schools, are socially stratified layer upon layer upon layer to serve white economically stable individuals, or individuals that belong to that WASP culture. What that means is that other individuals, or othered individuals, as Gloria Inzeljour Bell Hooks would put it, when they come into these institutions, they're automatically going to have a more difficult time navigating through them. Because the culture of those institutions don't adhere to them. They don't understand those cultures because it's not theirs. What new racism does is it creates this false sense of equality, because new racism is denying that those forms of discrimination exist. It's denying that these institutions are layered and socially, racially stratified. And so by denying that, they're creating this false sense of equality. And so what that does is that to those being oppressed, they go on being oppressed and their hardships are diluted and go unacknowledged, which is hurtful, just as hurtful as outright prejudice and outright racism. Also, the institutions that are oppressing and the individuals within them, they continue oppressing without any consequence to their actions. And so new racism is basically brushing that discrimination under the rug and pretending that discrimination doesn't exist. We can kind of think about it as if you've ever heard anyone say, "I'm colorblind, I don't see race." Although that may be coming from a good place, what they're doing is that they're automatically saying that those hardships that person might experience don't exist, and they're saying that we're all equal and that those hardships don't exist. And second, what they're doing is they're erasing that person's cultural history as well. And so that is obviously just as hurtful. We also have to understand that new racism isn't just a race issue. It involves ethnic racism, socioeconomics, and class discrimination as well. New racism grants white privilege to white economically stable individuals while marginalizing those who do not fit in that category. So those without white privilege are continually discriminated against within these institutions. We also have to understand that culture is inextricably linked to new racism. Because these different races, these different ethnic groups, and these different people from all these different socioeconomic backgrounds, they exhibit different cultures. And so therefore, those cultures maintain different values, different norms, and also different languages and dialects as well. And those languages or dialects can be any kind of accented English, African American vernacular, or the English that our international students speak as well. We also have to understand that culture and language are inextricably linked. That culture shapes language and language shapes culture. Not only do they shape one another, they also reflect one another as well. And because they do that, the individual who speaks the culture who speaks the culture, that is a part of their identity, their language. We can kind of think about it in this way. If thoughts exist within the individual and are shaped out of the individual's experiences and culture, you're going to have to yes. And communication is derived from those people's thoughts. So those thoughts that are shaped out of their culture and their experiences. And their language is how they communicate and how they've been taught to communicate within their culture and within those experiences within their culture. Then we can understand that their language is a part of their identity. And that culture and language shape that. As so much of what culture is internal in how you think and how you perceive the world and how you feel about the world. Language is oftentimes that external expression of that culture. And then the other one, sorry. That's fine. The issue comes, though, is when people from these different cultures come together and the languages reflecting these cultures mix and adapt. That happens, and that's okay. And that's why we have so many different dialects and so many different types of languages. But when cultural groups are drastically unequal in their social and interactional relationships, and especially when one group has been dehumanized in comparison to the other, the grounds for cultivating myths is fertile. Myths such as the one that Walt Whitman here is trying to debunk is that African American children are linguistically deprived. That's a myth. That isn't true. It's not that they're linguistically deprived. They just speak a different culture speak a different language that reflects a different culture. And that doesn't mean that they're missing something. And so that's that discrimination, that new racism kind of in play there. Also, another myth is that the English spoken by our international students, or students who have English as a second language, that accented English, a lot of times, a lot of English language learners that I hear who come in our writing center, they often tell me that people often question their intelligence because of their accent. That's discriminatory in its own way, although people don't necessarily outright mean it. It's that social stratification, that culture that's built, and so that's where that new racism comes in, and that's also a myth. They aren't less intelligent than anyone else because they have an accent. It sounds ridiculous when you say it, but I mean, obviously people feel that way. We can also think of the academy having its own culture. It has its own norms, its own values, its own traditions, and it also has its own language as well. When we think about the language of the academy, that standard academic English, if we ask who that sounds like, we can understand that it sounds like that WASP culture, those white economically stable individuals. And by the academy having standard edited academic English as their language, what they're doing is they're holding that language up as the goal of assimilation. What they're saying is they're holding that culture up on a pedestal, while anybody else who comes from a different cultural background, different ethnic group, different class group, they are automatically going to have a harder time navigating through the institution of the academy, which is one of those institutions that is socially stratified. And the institution, the academy as an institution, has a lot of power because they're gatekeepers. And what that means is that you apply to the academy, and you either get in and the gates open for you, or you don't and the gates remain shut. And so being able to navigate through that WASP culture of the academy is important. As Bell Hooks puts it, composition has long been equated with hegemony of standard English and with gatekeeping. Intolerance of other language constitutes the intolerance of other cultures and the individuals who hold their culture and language as a sense of self. If we are indeed a multi-pluralistic and multi-ethnic nation, why is it then that our institutions don't serve a broader audience? Could we ask, if our nation celebrates different cultures, different languages, and welcomes diversity, why is it then that our institutions and the laws and norms within them only serve white economically sound cultures? By holding up WASP culture in our institutions and in the academy, we automatically devalue and delegitimize different languages and therefore different cultures and therefore different identities. By having WASP culture as the goal of assimilation, what we're doing is we're asking diversity to conform. And we have to ask ourselves if that's something that we want. My identity is I'm a Generation 1.5 English language learner, which means I learned English at a very young age when I started in elementary school. I'm Albanian. My name's Laura. It's weird. It's Vlora, actually. And because I learned English at a young age, I became acculturated, which means that because I am the product of two cultures, my Albanian culture and my Albanian language at home, that is deeply embedded in me because that's what I know, that's my family, that's my home life. And the American culture and the English culture that I obviously took part in because that was all around me. It was my friends, it was my teachers, it was my school, it was how I had to communicate with people. And because of that, I'm in the borderlands, as Gloria Hooks, or Gloria Anzaldúa, or Bell Hooks would say. And I'm in the borderlands between these two cultures, the Albanian and both the American, which can be frustrating at times. When I was younger and I started learning English at school, I had a very difficult time. And over time, I started to have this idea of myself that I was naturally stupid, I guess, is the best way to put it. That I didn't have the mental capabilities to learn like everyone else around me. And so I think that was because I was constantly comparing myself to my peers who I felt could learn better than I could. And so after a time, that kind of gave me a little bit more drive because I was so frustrated all the time and not being able to communicate with people effectively. And so sometimes when I see our ELL and our English language learners and our multilingual learners who come into our writing centers, and I see that frustration in them, and I see people, and I hear them tell me things like people, think that they're less intelligent because of their accent, it bothers me to no end. And when I hear different dialects and I read different dialects and I hear those accented Englishes, I enjoy them so much more. English language learners are my favorite people to work with. It's become the focus of my writing center career. And so as Gloria Hooks, as Gloria Hooks, this is going to happen. As Gloria Anseldu has put it, there's something very seductive about fitting in. There's something very seductive about Western theory, and pretty soon, instead of subverting, challenging, and making marks on the wall, you get taken in. As you can tell, I don't speak with an accent anymore. My English is pretty well, it's pretty good, that you wouldn't be able to tell that English is my second language by just talking to me. And I think that I wanted so badly to be a part of that academic culture. I wanted people to look at me as intelligent, that I, after a while, started to erase my own cultural history. And now that when I go back to my my home country, I guess, back to my village, and because I'm the first generation here, and with my family members, I speak my mother tongue in an American accent. And that's very frustrating. I feel like I've lost a lot because of that. And so oftentimes when I have these English language learners sitting next to me at the tutors table, and I see their frustration, I wonder if I can teach them how to adapt like I had to. So I had to adapt. I learned how to code switch. I learned how to understand that who I was talking to and how I was talking to them mattered, and in what situation as well. I developed deep rhetorical skills because of it, which is something I think has helped me a lot today, which is something good that has come out of this acculturation. But I always wondered, can I teach them how to adapt like I had to? But then it became a question of, should I teach them how to adapt like I had to? Are they going to be erasing their cultural history like I erased mine? Are they soon going to be talking in their mother tongue with an American accent? And is that okay? But that question becomes more difficult because on one hand, this academy is socially stratified, and even though when these students come in, I want to tell them when I'm sitting next to them to write with their accent, to enjoy it, to write in their own voice, and that voice that reflects their culture. But at the same time, I know that as soon as they walk out of our doors of our writing center, they're going to be expected to write and conform and assimilate to that WASP culture, to write in that white academic standardized English. And I know that they're going to be penalized for it. I know that they're going to be penalized by speaking in their own voice. And I want to give them the tools to be able to succeed in the academy, to be able to navigate through this socially stratified institution. But at the same time, am I withholding information from them if I don't? Am I helping them not succeed? But if I do teach them how to adapt, if I do teach them this rhetoric of the academy, if I teach them how to speak in this white academic voice, am I automatically devaluing their identity? Am I automatically devaluing and delegitimatizing their culture and the language that reflects that? Am I, just by doing that, just by teaching them this white privileged dialect, am I automatically not only promoting racism, but practicing discrimination in the writing center as well? And is that something what we want to do? Albert DeCiccio wrote, there we go, sorry. The writing center community celebrates diversity on the one hand, and it's championing acculturation on the other. They note that while the differences in writing should be celebrated in the writing center, the writing center unfortunately becomes a place where these cultures and the people that reflect these cultures come in, and they're expected to write as if there were no difference between their language and standard academic English. So I guess the overreaching question that I want all of you to take with you today and discuss amongst yourself, discuss with me, and discuss within your own writing centers is, when our students, writers, come through the Writing Center doors, where do we stand on promoting or resisting the academic voice? And thank you.